Alina was the kind of person you would walk past in a grocery store and never look at twice. At 27, she lived a life that was perfectly average in every way. She rented a small one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a brick building. She worked a desk job where she filed papers and answered emails. And she spent her Friday nights watching old movies with a bowl of popcorn. She didn't mind being simple. In fact, she usually liked it. There was no stress, no drama, and no pressure to be something she wasn't. She was just Alina, however. Every now and then, a quiet thought would nag at her in the back of her mind. It was the feeling that she was just floating through life instead of actually living it. She had always dreamed of playing an instrument. Not just any instrument, but the violin. The sound of it gave her chills. It sounded like a human voice singing without words. But whenever she thought about it, she told herself the same thing. Asterisk. You are too old now. People start playing when they are 5 years old. You missed your chance. Asterisk. One rainy Tuesday, that quiet doubt turned into a loud reality. Alina met up with a few acquaintances at a small coffee shop downtown. The rain was tapping against the window, and the smell of roasted beans filled the air. There were 4 of them sitting around a wooden table. Alina sat in the corner, holding a warm mug between her hands. The conversation started off normal enough. They talked about their jobs and the weather, but eventually, the topic turned to hobbies. One of the men, a guy named Tom who always liked to hear his own voice, started talking about how he had started learning the piano again. He talked about how music was a language you had to learn young. It's all about brain plasticity, Tom said, leaning back in his chair with a smug look on his face. If you don't start training your brain for music before you're 10, you'll never be great at it. You can try, sure, but you'll always be mediocre. Alina listened quietly. She looked down at her coffee. She knew Tom could be arrogant, but his words stung because they sounded like what she had been telling herself for years. I don't know, Alina said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. I think you can learn things at any age if you practice hard enough. Tom laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, but it was the kind of laugh someone makes when they think they know more than you. Come on, Alina, look at us. We work all day. We're tired. Do you really think someone with a busy schedule and no musical background could pick up the violin now? I've always wanted to try, Alina admitted. She felt her face get a little hot. I just think it's never too late to try something new. Another person at the table, a woman named Lisa, shook her head. It's not just about trying. The violin is incredibly hard, Alina. It's not like playing the radio. You have to hold the bow, stand a certain way, read music. It takes years of pain to get good. You're a simple person. You like your quiet life. Why would you want to add that kind of stress to it? It's not about stress, Alina said, feeling a spark of annoyance. It's about doing something beautiful. Tom leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. He looked at her with a challenge in his eyes. Okay, I'll tell you what. If you think I'm wrong, prove it. The table went quiet. The noise of the coffee shop seemed to fade away as everyone looked at Alina. Buy a violin, Tom said. Give yourself 6 months. If you can play a song actually play it, not just make screeching noises, and play it well enough that people don't cover their ears, then I will apologize. I will say I was wrong. But if you quit, or if you sound terrible, you have to admit that some things are just left for the professionals. Alina's heart started beating faster. She looked at their faces. Tom looked amused. Lisa looked skeptical. The other person just looked confused. They were waiting for her to back down. They expected her to laugh it off and say, "You're right, it's silly." But something inside Alina snapped. She was tired of being the simple woman who didn't take risks. She was tired of people telling her what she could and couldn't do. It didn't matter if it was the violin or something else. She was tired of being underestimated. Okay, Alina said. Her voice was stronger now. I accept the challenge. Tom raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised. Really, you're going to buy a violin? Yes, she said. I will buy a violin. I will practice. And in 6 months, I will play for you. She finished her coffee, stood up, and grabbed her coat. She didn't want to sit there any longer and listen to them talk about why she would fail. She walked out of the coffee shop and into the cool, rainy air. As soon as the door closed behind her, the reality of what she had just done hit her. Asterisk, what have I gotten myself into? She thought. She walked home with her head down, the rain misting on her glasses. By the time she unlocked her apartment door, the excitement had turned into pure fear. She walked into her living room and looked around. It was tidy and quiet. There were no instruments here. There were no music books. Just a TV, a couch, and a desk. She sat down on the couch and put her face in her hands. She had just publicly bet that she could learn one of the hardest instruments in the world in half a year. She didn't even know where to buy a violin, let alone how to hold one. She imagined the embarrassment of 6 months from now. She saw herself standing in front of Tom and Lisa, making horrible noises with a stick and a wooden box, and them laughing at her. It was a nightmare scenario. But then another image popped into her head. She saw herself playing. She imagined the feeling of the bow in her hand and the vibration of the strings against her chin. She imagined the look on Tom's face, not of mockery, but of shock. She imagined proving to herself that she wasn't too old, that she wasn't too simple, and that she could still surprise people. Alina stood up. She walked over to her desk, opened her laptop, and typed into the search bar. Asterisk. How much does a beginner violin cost? Asterisk. As she scrolled through the pages, looking at pictures of shiny wooden instruments, her hands stopped shaking. She realized that the fear wasn't going to go away. The only way to beat it was to go through it. She was 27 years old. She had a job, she had a home, and she had a challenge. She was going to do this even if she was terrified. She picked up her phone and texted her friend. She didn't say much, just 3 words. I'm doing it. That night, Alina didn't watch her usual movies. She sat on her couch with a notebook and started writing down a plan. She didn't know it yet, but this simple challenge was about to turn her entire life upside down. She wasn't just going to learn an instrument. She was going to learn who she really was when the pressure was on. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive. The package arrived 3 days later. Alina had spent the entire morning tracking the delivery, refreshing the page on her computer at work until her boss gave her a strange look. When she finally got home and saw the long, narrow cardboard box leaning against her apartment door, her heart did a nervous flip. She carried it inside and placed it on the kitchen table. Staring at it like it was a bomb that might go off, she had watched countless videos on how to unbox a violin, how to tighten the bow, and how to apply rosin. But doing it in real life was completely different. Her hands felt clumsy and large as she opened the box. Inside, wrapped in foam, lay the instrument. It wasn't a masterwork by any means. It was a cheap, factory-made beginner violin, but to Alina, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever owned. The wood was a shiny dark brown, and it smelled like varnish and new things. She took it out carefully. It felt lighter than she expected. She picked up the bow, a long stick of wood with horsehair attached to it. Following the instructions she had memorized, she tightened the screw at the end until the hair had a slight bounce to it. Then she took the small block of rosin. She had to run the bow hairs over it to get the grip needed to make sound. She did this over and over, watching the white powder dust the dark hairs. "Okay," she whispered to the empty room. "Here we go." Alina lifted the violin to her shoulder. It felt awkward and unnatural. She had to tuck it under her chin and turn her head to the left. It felt like trying to hug a tree. Her left hand hovered over the neck. She didn't know where to put her fingers, so she just clamped them down. Then, with her right hand, she drew the bow across the strings. The sound that came out wasn't music. It was a screech. It sounded like a cat caught in a blender, loud and piercing. Alina dropped the bow from the shock, the handle clattering onto the table. The noise echoed in her small apartment, bouncing off the walls. She stood there, frozen, waiting for her neighbors to start banging on the floor or the walls. Silence returned, but her ears were still ringing. "Is this what I signed up for?" she asked herself. She felt a wave of discouragement wash over her. This was going to be 1,000 times harder than she thought. The first week was a nightmare. Alina quickly learned that the violin does not forgive bad habits. Her fingers were soft and unused to pressing down on thin metal strings. Within 2 days, the tips of her left fingers were raw and sore. By the end of the week, they had developed deep, painful calluses. Every time she pressed down, it hurt. But the pain in her fingers was nothing compared to the frustration in her mind. She was waking up at 5 a.m. every morning to practice before work. Her alarm would go off in the dark, and she would drag herself out of her warm bed, her eyes heavy with sleep. The world outside was quiet, the streets still dark, which was exactly what she needed. She couldn't practice in the evening because she lived in an old building with thin walls, and she was terrified of annoying the people living below her, so she practiced in the early morning gloom. She bought a rubber mute, a small device that clipped onto the bridge of the violin to dampen the sound. It made the instrument quiet, like a distant whisper, but it also made the tones sound flat and dull. Still, she went through the motions. She learned how to hold the bow without her wrists locking up. She learned where to place her feet for balance. She played open strings over and over again, trying to keep the sound steady. A, E, E, D, 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 G, D. It was boring. It was tedious. It was lonely. 2 weeks into the challenge, Alina almost quit. She came home from a particularly hard day at the office where everything had gone wrong. She was tired, her head hurt, and she just wanted to lie on the couch and eat pizza. The violin case sat in the corner of the room staring at her. It felt like a judgment. She hadn't made any progress. She still couldn't play a single song. She couldn't even play a recognizable scale without the notes squeaking. She remembered the coffee shop. She remembered Tom's laugh and Lisa's skepticism. "You like your quiet life," Lisa had said. And she was right. Alina did like her quiet life. Why was she trying to change it? She wasn't a musician. She was just an administrative assistant who liked to read. She grabbed her phone, scrolling through the contacts, half thinking about texting Tom and telling him he won. She couldn't do it. Instead, she opened a browser and searched for adult beginner violin support. She felt pathetic doing it, but she needed to know if she was the only one struggling. The search results pulled up a forum filled with stories from people all over the world. She read a post from a man who started at 50. He wrote about how his wife threatened to divorce him if he didn't stop playing in the house because it sounded so bad. She read a post from a woman who started at 40 and cried every night for the first month because her fingers hurt so much. But they all kept going. They talked about the breaking point, the moment when the body just gives up. And the only thing keeping you going is sheer stubbornness. Alina read these stories until she realized something important. She wasn't failing. She was paying her dues. This was what it felt like to learn. If it was easy, everyone would do it. The next morning, when the alarm went off at 5 a.m., she didn't drag herself out of bed. She got up with a sense of purpose. She made her coffee, looked out the window at the purple sunrise, and opened the case. She decided to change her approach. Instead of trying to be perfect, she decided to just listen. She closed her eyes and focused entirely on the vibration of the wood against her collarbone. She tried to feel the connection between her breath and the bow. She slowed everything down. Instead of rushing to play a song, she played just one note. One long, sustained, beautiful note. G-A-G-G. It was clean. There was no scratch, no squeak. Just a pure, steady hum. Alina opened her eyes. A smile spread across her face. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. For the first time, the violin felt like a part of her, not a foreign object she was fighting against. She played the note again. Then she moved to the D string. The weeks began to pass, and the grind turned into a rhythm. The seasons were changing outside her window, and Alina was changing too. The blisters on her fingers turned into hard, protective calluses. She didn't need to look at her hand to find the strings anymore. Her fingers knew the way. She started playing simple scales. Up and down the neck of the violin. The muscle memory was building. She noticed that her posture at work improved. She sat straighter in her chair. Her confidence in meetings grew. There was something about mastering something difficult that bled into the rest of her life. She felt tougher. She felt capable, but she wasn't ready for the public yet. Not even close. One evening, about 2 months in, she took the mute off. Her downstairs neighbor was away for the weekend, so she had a rare opportunity to play at full volume. She stood in the center of her living room. She took a deep breath and raised the bow. She played a simple melody, a children's song she had found in a beginner book. It was just "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," but to Alina, it sounded like a symphony. The notes rang out, clear and bright, filling the small space. The sound bounced off the walls, rich and full. She hit a wrong note, and her finger slipped, causing a brief screech, but she didn't stop. She kept playing, recovering from the mistake when she finished. She stood there for a long time, listening to the silence that followed. She realized that she was actually doing it. She was playing the violin. She was no longer the woman who just wished she could play music. She was a violinist. Maybe a beginner, maybe a rough one, but a violinist nonetheless. Elena looked at the calendar on her wall. 3 months down. 3 months to go until the deadline. She walked over to the calendar and marked off another day with a red pen. The challenge was on, and she wasn't going to back down. Tom had no idea what was coming. The seasons were shifting outside Elena's window, bringing a crisp chill to the air that matched the seriousness she felt inside her small apartment. 3 months had passed since the day the cardboard box arrived. The squeaky phase, as she called it, was mostly over. Her fingers, once soft and prone to blistering, were now tipped with hard, tough calluses. She didn't have to look at the strings to find the notes anymore. Her left hand seemed to know exactly where to go on its own. Alina was changing in other ways, too. The discipline of waking up at 5 a.m. every single morning had carved a new kind of confidence into her personality. At work, people noticed she sat up straighter. When she spoke in meetings, her voice didn't waver. She wasn't just the simple administrative assistant anymore. She was someone who had a secret life, a secret fire. The boring predictability that used to define her days was gone, placed by a quiet determination that hummed beneath the surface. She had chosen a specific piece of music to master for the deadline. It wasn't a fast, showy tune that would prove how fast her fingers could move. She knew she couldn't compete with professionals on speed. Instead, she chose a song called Ave Maria. It was a slow, deeply emotional piece that relied on feeling and tone rather than technical gymnastics. She practiced it until her shoulders ached. Focusing on making the violin sing, she wanted the notes to sound like they were breathing. With the 6-month deadline now visible on the horizon, the pressure began to mount. The challenge with Tom was always in the back of her mind. But it was a text message from him one Tuesday afternoon that brought it all crashing back into the present. Her phone buzzed on her desk while she was typing up a report. It was Tom. Hey, the message read, "We haven't seen you in a while. How is the concert violinist routine going? Did you sell the instrument on eBay yet?" Alina stared at the screen. The smirk was practically jumping off the pixels. She could picture him sitting in his office, thinking he was very funny. She typed out a response quickly, her fingers flying. "I'm still here, still practicing." "Sure you are," he replied instantly. "Listen, we are all getting dinner at that Italian place next Friday. You should come. We won't ask you to play for us, don't worry. No need to be embarrassed." Alina felt a flash of anger, sharp and hot. They expected her to be embarrassed. They expected her to have given up, to have admitted defeat and slunk back into her simple, safe little box. For a second, she almost accepted the invite, planning to just sit there quietly and eat her pasta while they made jokes. But then she stopped. She thought about the Ave Maria. She thought about the sunrise she had watched every morning for months while the rest of the city was asleep. She thought about the calluses on her fingertips. "No thanks," she texted back. "I'll be busy. Busy practicing?" "Lol," Tom sent back. "Something like that," she wrote. Alina put her phone down. A new idea was forming in her mind, one that was terrifying but also electric. She didn't just want to play for them at a restaurant where the clatter of silverware would drown her out. She didn't want to play a private little show just to prove a point to 3 people. If she was going to do this, she wanted to do it right. That evening, she sat down with her laptop and started searching. She typed open mic nights downtown into the search bar. A list of venues came up. Most were for singers and rock bands, but one place caught her eye. It was a small, artsy cafe called the Blue Note. It was known for having an open mic on Thursday nights. But unlike the loud bars, they specifically advertised acoustic performances. She clicked on their website. There was a sign-up sheet. Alina stared at the sign-up button. This was real. This wasn't her living room with the mute on. This was a stage. Real people. Real silence. Real judgment. "What are you doing, Alina?" she whispered to herself. She was crazy. She was a 27-year-old beginner who had been playing for 3 months. People at open mics were usually seasoned players or singer-songwriters trying to get discovered. She was going to be the weird one playing classical music alone. She thought about Tom laughing. She thought about Lisa saying she was too simple to add stress to her life. Alina took a deep breath, her hand trembling slightly, and clicked the button. She filled in the form. Name, Alina. Performance type, violin. Song, Ave Maria. The moment she hit submit, she felt like she might throw up. It was done. She had booked a slot for 2 weeks from Thursday. The next 2 weeks were a blur of panic and practice. Alina pushed herself harder than ever before. She started staying up later, sacrificing sleep to run through the song hundreds of times. She worked on her stage presence, practicing in front of a mirror. She watched videos of professional performers to see how they stood, how they held the bow when they weren't playing, how they acknowledged the audience. She realized that playing the notes wasn't enough anymore. She had to perform. She had to look like she belonged on that stage, even if every nerve in her body was screaming that she didn't. During the day, she acted normal at work. She answered phones, filed papers, and chatted with coworkers. But she felt like a secret agent. She had this massive event looming over her, a life-changing moment. Nobody knew except her. The night before the performance, she called her friend. This was a friend who wasn't part of Tom's group, someone kind who always listened. "I'm freaking out," Alina admitted as soon as the call connected. She was pacing her apartment floor, the violin case leaning against the sofa. "I signed up for an open mic. Tomorrow night. I'm going to play." There was a pause on the line. "The one Tom challenged you to? You're ready for that?" "I have to be," Alina said, running a hand through her hair. "I don't want to just show them a video. I want it to be real. But I'm scared. What if I freeze? What if my bow shakes?" "Then you shake," her friend said softly. "Alina, do you know how cool it is that you're even doing this? 3 months ago, you didn't know how to hold the instrument. Now you're booking gigs. You've already won, no matter what happens tomorrow." Alina let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Her friend was right. Even if she played terribly, she had done the work. She had put in the hours. She had changed herself from the inside out. The day of the performance arrived with a gray, overcast sky. Alina went to work, but she felt like she was moving through water. Everything seemed distant. She packed her dress clothes, a simple black skirt, and a nice blouse in a bag, along with her violin. She felt like she was carrying a secret weapon. She didn't tell Tom or Lisa or anyone else in that group that she was playing. Instead, she sent a text to the group chat. "Hey everyone, I'm going to be at the Blue Note tomorrow night around 8 p.m. A few friends are playing there. You should come watch." "It'll be fun," she lied. She told them they were going to watch other people. She wanted them there, but she didn't want them to come with the mindset of judging her. She wanted them to be relaxed, sipping their coffee, thinking they were just supporting a local art scene. "Sounds like a chill night. See you there," Lisa added. Alina put her phone in her pocket. Her stomach did a flip, but she steeled her nerves. She left work early and went to the venue to check it out. It was a small room with dark brick walls and dim lighting. There was a single stool and a microphone stand in the center of a small, wooden stage. She walked up to the stage and stood on it. Looking out at the empty tables and chairs, she felt a shiver run down her spine. In 24 hours, these seats would be filled. She looked down at the floorboards. They were scuffed and worn. Thousands of people had stood here and poured their hearts out. "You can do this," she whispered to the empty room. "You are not the same person who made that bet. You are a musician." She walked off the stage, her heels clicking on the floor. She was terrified, yes. But underneath the fear, there was a current of excitement, pure and adrenaline-fueled. The simple life was about to collide with the extraordinary, and Alina was ready to play. The night of the performance had finally arrived. The air outside the Blue Note Cafe was cool, but inside, the atmosphere was warm and buzzing with low conversations. The smell of roasted coffee beans, mixed with the faint scent of pastries and old wood. It was a cozy place, filled with small round tables and mismatched chairs, but to Alina, walking through the front door felt like walking into a stadium. Her heart was hammering so hard against her ribs that she was sure the people standing near her could hear it. She was wearing her black skirt and a nice white blouse, clothes that made her feel slightly more dressed up than her usual casual self. In her left hand, she gripped the handle of her violin case so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She felt like she was carrying a suitcase full of explosives. She scanned the room, looking for a familiar face. In the back corner, near the stage, she saw them. Tom, Lisa, and the others were sitting around a table, laughing and sipping drinks. They looked relaxed, completely unaware that Alina wasn't just here to hang out. Seeing Tom there brought a rush of memories back. The laughter, the doubt, the challenge. He was gesturing wildly, telling a story, looking like the same confident person he had always been. Alina took a deep breath and walked toward them, but she didn't stop at their table. She gave a small wave and a tight smile when they noticed her. "You made it," Tom called out, raising his glass. "Glad you could join us. Grab a chair." "Actually," Alina said, her voice sounding surprisingly steady, "I can't sit right now. I have to. Get ready." "Ready for what?" Lisa asked, looking confused. Alina didn't answer. She gave them a small nod and turned toward the side of the room where the musicians were gathering. She walked behind a heavy velvet curtain that separated the main cafe from the small backstage area. It was really just a narrow hallway lined with instruments and cables. But to her, it was a sanctuary. She found an empty chair and sat down. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably now. She set the violin case on her lap and popped the latches. The sight of the instrument usually calmed her, but tonight it looked back at her with a terrifying glare. "What am I doing?" She whispered into the quiet hallway. She felt a sudden urge to grab her bag and run out the back exit. She could go home, get into her pajamas, and pretend this never happened. She could text Tom tomorrow and say she got sick. But then the door opened, and a guy with a guitar walked in. He looked nervous too. He was tuning his instrument and humming to himself. He looked at Alina and gave her a sympathetic smile. "First time?" he asked. Alina nodded, not trusting her voice to speak. "It gets easier," he said, tightening a string. "The first 10 seconds are the worst. Once you play the first note, you forget everyone is watching. You just get into the music." Alina nodded again. "Just get into the music," she told herself. Asterisk, don't think about Tom. Don't think about the bet. Just play. Asterisk. She took her violin out of the case. She applied the rosin to her bow with slow, deliberate strokes. She tuned the strings carefully, listening to the pitch. It was a familiar ritual, a routine she had done hundreds of times in her living room. As her fingers touched the wood and the strings, the panic began to recede, just a little bit. This was her violin. She knew it. It knew her. From the other side of the curtain, she heard the host speaking. "Right, everyone. Welcome back to Open Mic Night. That was a great set. Coming up next, we have something a little different. Please welcome Alina to the stage." That was her cue. Alina stood up. Her legs felt like they were made of lead, but she forced them to move. She walked toward the curtain. The guy with the guitar gave her a thumbs up. She took a breath, pushed the heavy fabric aside, and stepped out into the light. The transition was immediate and blinding. The spotlight hit her face, washing out the room. She couldn't see the tables or the faces of the people anymore. All she could see was a wall of darkness in front of her, but she could feel them. The room, which had been buzzing with chatter, fell silent as she walked to the center of the stage. She placed her music stand down, even though she had the song memorized. It was a shield, something to hide behind slightly. She lifted the violin and tucked it under her chin. She positioned the bow. The silence in the room was heavy. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the space. It was so quiet she could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the back of the cafe. She looked out into the darkness, trying to find where her friends were sitting. She couldn't see them, but she knew they were there. She knew Tom was watching, probably checking his watch, waiting for the train wreck. Alina closed her eyes. She blocked out the light, the stage, and the expectations. She thought of the 5 a.m. mornings. She thought of the blisters. She thought of the feeling of the music flowing through her when she was alone in her apartment. She wasn't here to prove a point anymore. She was here to share something she loved. She lifted her right arm. She brought the bow down to touch the strings. For a split second, she hesitated. The fear tried to grab her one last time. But then she remembered the advice from the guitar player. Just play the first note. She drew the bow across the G string. The sound that came out was deep and rich. It wasn't a screech. It wasn't a wobble. It was a solid, beautiful note that hung in the air like a cloud. Alina felt a shockwave go through her body, and it worked. She was playing. She began the melody of Ave Maria. It was slow, and she took her time. She didn't rush. She focused entirely on her left hand, pressing the strings down firmly, changing the positions with a grace she had fought hard to earn. As she moved from the low G string to the higher D and A strings, the music began to swell. The song was sad and hopeful at the same time. Alina poured everything she had into it. She put in her tiredness from work, her fear of failure, and her quiet determination. The violin sang. The sound carried through the room, pure and clear. The acoustics in the cafe were better than she expected, and the notes seemed to float upward, filling the space. She forgot about the audience. She forgot about the bet. It was just her and the instrument. She moved her arm, drawing the bow in long, smooth strokes. She vibrated her fingers on the neck to add that trembling vocal quality to the notes. She was no longer Alina, the simple assistant. She was a musician, telling a story without words as she reached the climax of the song. The notes became higher and softer. She hit a tricky run, a series of quick notes, and for a millisecond. Her heart skipped a beat, but her fingers didn't hesitate. They did exactly what they were trained to do. She landed the transition perfectly. She was flying. The sensation was better than anything she had ever felt. It was a mix of total concentration and total freedom. She realized in that moment that she wasn't just playing a song. She was declaring who she was. She wasn't too old. She wasn't untalented. She was capable of beauty. The final measures of the song approached. Alina slowed the tempo down, drawing out the last notes. She played the final phrase, her hand moving slowly, deliberately, squeezing every drop of emotion out of the last chord. She lifted the bow off the strings, severing the connection. The final note faded into the silence. Disappearing into the rafters, Alina stood there on the stage, her chest heaving slightly, her ears ringing with the echo of the music. She slowly opened her eyes, adjusting to the bright light. She lowered the violin to her side. She didn't know what to expect. She half expected polite applause, or maybe just the sound of people going back to their conversations. For a split second, there was absolute stillness. The silence was so heavy, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on the stage. Alina felt a cold spike of panic. Had it been bad? Had she made a mistake she didn't hear? Then, from the back of the room, a single person clapped. Then another. Then the sound erupted. It wasn't just clapping. It was a roar of noise. People were cheering, whistling, and stomping their feet. The silence shattered. Alina stood frozen, blinking against the spotlight. She could see shapes standing up in the darkness. The audience was on their feet. They weren't just being polite. They were moved. She looked toward the back corner where the table was. She couldn't see their faces clearly, but she saw the silhouette of a man standing up, slowly. Tom was clapping. He wasn't laughing. He was standing there, still in the middle of the cheering crowd, clapping with everyone else. Alina felt a lump form in her throat, hot and sudden. She brought a shaking hand to her mouth, trying to cover a sob. She bowed awkwardly, nearly dropping the bow, but she didn't care. The tears were streaming down her face now, blurring her vision. She wasn't the simple woman anymore. She had done it. The sound of the applause was still ringing in Elena's ears as she hurried off the stage, her heart feeling like it was going to burst right out of her chest. The adrenaline that had kept her standing tall was quickly fading, replaced by a shaky, trembling feeling in her hands and knees. She slipped behind the heavy velvet curtain and leaned against the cool brick wall of the backstage hallway. Closing her eyes and taking a deep, ragged breath, she had done it. The notes were played, the song was finished, and she hadn't collapsed. But now came the part that terrified her even more than performing, facing the people. Specifically, she had to face Tom. Elena packed her violin away with hands that were still not quite steady. She clicked the latches shut, securing the instrument that had changed her life. For a moment, she just stood there, looking down at the case. She felt a strange mix of exhaustion and euphoria. The woman who had walked into this coffee shop an hour ago was not the same woman standing there now. That woman was full of doubt. This woman was full of fire. She smoothed down her skirt, wiped a tear from her cheek, and squared her shoulders. She couldn't hide backstage forever. It was time to go out there. When she stepped back into the main room, the atmosphere had shifted. The noise level was high, but it felt different now, more respectful. As she walked through the crowd, people she didn't know turned to look at her. A man in a leather jacket gave her a nod of approval. A woman sitting near the front smiled and whispered beautiful as she passed by. Elena smiled back, a genuine bright smile that reached her eyes. She wasn't invisible anymore. She made her way to the back corner. Her friends were still sitting at the table, but the mood around them was completely different. Tom and Lisa weren't laughing or checking their phones. They were sitting in silence, their eyes fixed on Elena as she approached. There was an empty chair at the table, but Elena didn't sit down immediately. She stood, holding her violin case like a shield. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. It was the kind of awkward silence that happens when words just aren't enough. Tom looked at Elena, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. He opened his mouth, then closed it, running a hand through his hair. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief. Finally, he broke the silence. I don't know what to say, Elena," Lisa jumped in, her voice soft. "That was amazing. Honestly, I had no idea you could sound like that. You were a different person up there." Elena looked at them. She realized she didn't need them to validate her anymore. The applause from the strangers had already done that. But hearing them admit it was still satisfying. "I told you I was practicing," Elena said gently. She wasn't angry. In fact, she felt a sudden wave of pity for them. They had stayed in their safe little boxes, judging her, while she had gone out and struggled and grown. They were the same people they were 6 months ago. She was not. "I thought you were joking," Tom admitted. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his voice lower. "I really thought you were going to play a few squeaky notes and give up. I was wrong. I was really, really wrong." He looked down at his drink, looking ashamed. "I'm sorry, Elena, that was an incredible performance." Elena felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't just about winning the bet. It was about being seen. "It's okay, Tom," she said. "But you were right about one thing." Tom looked up, confused. "It was incredibly hard," Elena said, a small smirk playing on her lips. "My fingers bled. I woke up at 5 a.m. every day, and there were plenty of times I wanted to quit. But that's why it was worth it. Nothing easy is ever worth bragging about." The table sat in stunned silence for a moment after she spoke. Then Lisa laughed. It was a surprised, delighted laugh. "Well, you definitely showed us. You have to play for us again, but somewhere less crowded next time." "Maybe," Elena said. "I'm actually looking into joining a community orchestra. I think I'm done performing alone." She stayed at the table for another 20 minutes, making small talk, but her heart wasn't in the conversation. She felt restless. She didn't want to sit and analyze the past. She wanted to move forward. She finished her water, said her goodbyes, and promised to text them later. Walking out of the blue note and into the cool night, her felt like stepping into a brand new world. The city lights looked brighter. The sounds of the traffic sounded like a rhythm. She hailed a taxi for the ride home, too tired to take the bus. Clutching her violin case on her lap in the back seat, when she unlocked the door to her apartment, the familiar smell of her home greeted her. It was quiet, just as she liked it. But the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of potential. She walked over to the window and looked out at the city skyline below. She thought about the last 6 months. She realized that the challenge wasn't really about the violin. The violin was just the tool. The real challenge was against her own fear. She had been scared of being bad at something. She was scared of looking foolish. She had spent years protecting her simple image because it was safe. But by risking embarrassment, she had found something real. Alina walked over to her desk and opened her laptop. The browser was still open to the online forum for adult learners. She clicked on her profile and started a new thread. Her fingers danced across the keys, typing faster than she ever had before. "I did my first public performance tonight," she wrote. Asterisk, I was terrified. I almost didn't go. But I played, and people didn't laugh. They actually clapped. If you are sitting there with your instrument in the corner, thinking you're too old or too late, please believe me, you aren't. Just pick it up. Play the first note. The rest will follow. Asterisk, she hit post and closed her laptop. She didn't need validation from the internet either, but she knew how much those stories had helped her when she was starting out. If she could help one other person pick up a bow, then her night was twice as successful. She went to her calendar on the wall. The red X marks that had tracked her progress covered almost every day. She looked at the empty squares for the next month. She picked up a pen and wrote one word in the box for tomorrow: orchestra. Alina got ready for bed, washing her face and brushing her teeth. As she looked in the mirror, she saw the same face she had seen for years, but the eyes looking back were different. They were brighter, sharper, unafraid. She climbed into bed and pulled the covers up. But she wasn't tired in the same way she used to be. She wasn't exhausted from a boring day. She was tired from creating something. She closed her eyes, and instead of worrying about work or what people thought of her, she saw the spotlight. She heard the clear, ringing note of the G-string. She felt the vibration of the wood against her chin. Alina fell asleep with a smile on her face. The simple woman was gone. In her place was a musician, a risk-taker, and a woman who knew that as long as she was willing to try, it was never too late to change her song.